Hello, my name's Matthew. I'm from the Nations of Sanity project, a project that's based on the assertion that crime and law can and should be defined by the concept of individual self-ownership and established as the terms of a peace agreement. Now, for this video, I want to talk about the idea that freedom is utopian. More specifically, I want to preemptively debunk the idea that the solution that's presented by the Nations of Sanity project to establish a full and formalised form of freedom is in any way a utopian idea. Now, first of all, the Nations of Sanity project is called Nations of Sanity precisely because the demand that we make is the bare basic minimum that is required for any society to be considered a sane society, let alone a free society, which is what we're trying to establish with this proposed solution. The other reason why it shouldn't be considered to be utopian is what we're demanding is simply that the basic moral truth of individual self-ownership, which is a simple moral truth that most people can understand and live by in their normal day-to-day interpersonal lives. It only seems to be when it comes to government that we seem to have a disconnect with regards to this principle. But with regards to how most people live their own lives and how we treat each other, most people already operate based on this simple principle of individual self-ownership. Most people understand that everybody has right over only their own selves, and our right over our property is based on that same consistent principle as well. So again, it shouldn't be considered to be utopia for us to just live by a principle that most of us live by anyway, but just to extend that to the foundations of our society so that we don't have ruling governments that violate this principle so overtly. Now, there are good reasons for thinking that this idea is perhaps unrealistic or overly ambitious. Probably the best reason that someone could give would be to point to the fact that for as long as human history goes back, as far back as human recorded history goes, we have always been ruled by some kind of ruling authority, governments, kings, queens, slave owners. There's always been some kind of organization that has ruled over us in violation of our individual self-ownership. So I can understand why people think that that will never change because it hasn't changed so far. But I would like to remind people of the abolition of slavery. And although this wasn't done fully and properly, the fact of the matter is slavery was abolished, at least in a certain sense, to a certain degree. And prior to it being abolished, slavery was always a thing. It was always part of commerce. It was part of most societies around the world. So therefore, prior to the abolition of slavery, it would have seemed very unrealistic that we would ever abolish slavery. But once it's done, not only does it not seem like a utopian dream, but we look back and wonder how we ever allowed slavery to go on for as long as it did. And I'd like to think that if we ever achieve a fully free society, future generations can look back on today and wonder why we allowed statism to exist, when that violates our individual self-ownership just as much as slavery does. Statism being basically the system of government, the idea that people have the right to form governments and rule over other people. So there's a lot of reasons why we shouldn't consider freedom to be utopian, and we shouldn't consider this idea presented by the Nations of Sanity project to be utopian, because not only is the freedom that we're demanding a very kind of basic and universalizable form of freedom that most people can understand, and the few people that don't respect this principle are rightly recognized as criminals. But what we need to understand is that in our current society, a large portion of the group of people that we would consider criminals because they don't respect our basic rights are the people that rule us. They're the people that run our governments. And if we enact the solution presented by the Nations of Sanity project to establish this principle of individual self-ownership as the law through the terms of a peace agreement, if we do that, we will abolish governments as ruling authorities. But by abolishing them as ruling authorities, we are just washing away the coercive element. But we don't have to destroy all of our institutions and our infrastructure. We don't have to dig up all the roads just because they were paid for with stolen tax money. We don't have to tear down all our public buildings just because they were funded through the theft of taxation up to this point. What we can do is we can transfer the ownership of these buildings over to the people that were forced to pay for them. In other words, make the public actual owners of public property by making them collectively private owners of that public property, and then allowing people to either continue to support these collectives that are currently associated with government, or voluntarily opt out, cash out, and have nothing more to do with it. And the fact that people will have that choice will mean that all of our institutions will be subject to the principles of free market meritocracy, which will basically mean that if they're not worth their while, then they will die the appropriate death. And if they are worth their while, then people will voluntarily support them and participate in them. So that's another reason why we don't need to consider this idea to be utopian, because it's actually a very simple idea. And if we do it right, we can smoothly transition from this statist insanity to a truly free and sane society with the minimal disruption. Because by simply changing the law, we can keep everything that we currently have. All other institutions can continue, but they will just continue under a voluntary basis. And then those that are too corrupt or too inept to continue will die the death, and the systems that we want to keep will either wash away the corruption and get them working properly, or will replace them with an alternative that does work more properly. But either way, the fact of the matter is the path to freedom is actually a simple and very achievable path, and all it requires is enough people to kind of get behind it. Just like the abolition of slavery had a tipping point, the abolition of statism, the abolition of all coercion, and the full establishment of our freedom as individual self-owning people, that can actually be done, I won't say easily, but like I say, the solution is simple. That's not to be confused with easy. It will require collective effort. It will require people to wake up to this principle and actually unify in a united effort to focus on this cause. But just like the abolition of slavery, it can be done. And just because it hasn't done before doesn't mean we can't do it. And when we finally do it, we will wonder why it took us so long in the first place. So I hope I've made my point clear. If anyone has any queries about this or has any questions or wants to learn more about this project, you can learn more about the Nations of Sanity at nationsofsanity.com, which is the website that contains lots of articles, or the Nations of Sanity YouTube channel, which has lots of videos. Or please contact me if you have any disagreements. I'm always open to hearing arguments against this project. And if you want to support this project, I also welcome that as well. So thank you very much.